Call recording off. This call is being recorded.
Hello and welcome to the Node.js Foundation Core Technical Committee meeting for June 7th, 2017. And we no longer start the meeting with a stand-up, which means we instead are going to start the meeting with announcements. This is the first meeting since Node.js 8.0 was released and NPM 5 was released. And does anybody have anything they want to announce to the world via this meeting?
I guess one thing I can announce really quickly, NodeSource had some pretty fantastic numbers that they had reported in downloads in the first week. So just to anyone listening who downloaded Node 8 right away and was testing it out and helping us find bugs, thank you for jumping on the train so quickly.
Yeah, and there should be an 8.1 release coming up a little bit later today or even this evening. The thing I would mention is that the LTS and release teams are talking about chartering and working through the details of an official work group charter that we'll hopefully have on the table here for the CTC review within a week or two. So it's exciting.
Cool. James, there's probably not much you can do about it, but you're totally understandable, but you're kind of breaking up and a little distorted. But if there's nothing you can do about it, it's fine. Any other announcements for other CTC members or for the world or for whatever? All right, cool. Let's do the quick review of the previous meeting. The actual previous meeting was canceled, but the meeting before that, we talked about in the Node.js/Node repo issue or pull request number 13005, which is HTTP overridable keep alive behavior of agent. That PR was deemed uncontroversial, and I believe it landed today or yesterday or recently, I should say. Not sure, but so that was that. And then we discussed invert dependency between core and readable stream, which in the Node-EPS repository is issue number 49. And we chose to defer it until this meeting, but since then there's been additional discussion in the GitHub issue, and I believe that what's happening now is Matteo is going to put together a pull request at some point in the foreseeable future. Do I have that right, Matteo?
Yes, you have it right.
Excellent. Okay, so moving on to this week's agenda, we have, I believe, just one item officially. We might try to, if that discussion goes quickly, we might then do a quick vote on the two current CTC nominees. So let's get started. So this is okay, I'm lost already. This is noting that EOL platforms, end-of-life platforms, are not supported. There's some difference of opinion about what terminology means and what we should do as a project. This is a pull request in the Node.js/Node repository. It's pull request number 12672. And I think it was Sam Roberts who put this on the agenda. I'm not 100% sure. Let me take a quick look, or if anyone knows, speak up. No, it was Gibson. It's Gibson Fonstock. Okay, does anyone want to try to frame this? It looks like Matteo and Michael Dawson have been pretty active on it.
Yeah, I can take a cut at it. I mean, the initial suggestion was that we add into our supported description something that said, platforms are no longer supported once they go end of life. It came out of the discussion around Fedora 22, which is gone at end of life. We wanted to remove it from our CI. That sort of triggered some discussion saying, well, like, if we're not testing on it, should it not be supported? I think that, the objections to saying not supported is that it's not actually super clear what would what we mean by supported anyway. It's like, even if it's end of life, if somebody came and gave us a fix, we would probably take it as long as it didn't break any other platforms. And on the other hand, just because it's in our CI doesn't mean that we're actually going to fix everything, right? It's still open source, sort of best effort. And in that context, there was discussion over whether saying it's unsupported at end of life was the right thing to do or not.
It's kind of tricky because it sounds like everything is best effort.
Michael, question for you really quickly, because I haven't stayed 100% up to date. I know that there was some conflict around whether or not we should be dropping support. And so I think a really great example here is with Node v6 and Ubuntu 12, because that is end of life and it's no longer going to be having support from Canonical itself. Yet we're still, like, there was the question about whether or not it would be considered like a Semver major change, or whether or not it would be in the contract to stop testing and launching. I, for one, don't think that we should be supporting anything that's not being supported by their upstream maintainers. But I know that other people felt differently. Was there any resolution there?
I don't think so. I think that, I mean, this came from the in-between, rather than saying, well, we're not going to support Ubuntu 12 now because it will go out of end of life, was that if we added in a statement saying that, when they go out of, and when they go EOL, they will no longer be supported. That would mean that it wouldn't be Semver major to drop it in the middle, because we basically had told people ahead of time was.
And that's kind of like where I think that we should be heading personally. I mean, it seems kind of borderline irresponsible to continue like offering support. You couldn't see I was quoting, there were air quotes in the air there, but like to be supported
exactly right,
for like 2 years past the end of life date of the actual operating system. It's also, like, in my opinion, like kind of hypocritical if we've like really been pushing that people should be dropping support for 10 and 12 when we're no longer supporting it.
Right. I mean, I think if in the later part of the discussion, I suggested something that maybe takes a different tact, and so I'll read that out. And it was and then Gibson's suggestion, the shortened version of this, which ended up being, the community does not build or test against end-of-life distributions. Thus, we do not recommend that you use Node on end-of-life or unsupported platforms in production. Because we don't actually list the distributions. Like in our supported, we just list kernel levels, right? And whether those kernel levels.
Is that found in build, or where is that found? That's in core?
That is in PR is against, I think it's, where is it? It's in building.md. So we don't actually list like, Fedora, Ubuntu, which are the ones that actually go end of life. We just list the kernel version.
Yeah.
And so, we've never actually said that we support Ubuntu 12 or don't support Ubuntu 12. It just happens to have a kernel version, which is, within the range. And the fact that it goes end of life doesn't change its kernel version. But I do think there's some value in saying we really don't recommend you running on end of life. And that was a suggestion to say, well, why we don't recommend it. It's because we don't test on it, and we're not likely to find problems. If somebody actually found a problem and gave us a fix, I don't think we'd say forget it. But
Michael, who was the one who was giving pushback initially about the support contract?
Jordan Harbin.
Okay, well, I mean, that totally makes sense. Jordan has definitely held that opinion in the past on like things involving 10 and 12, and with his maintenance of NVM, I can totally see where that opinion is coming from. I personally do not agree. Rich, you had mentioned that you had some opinions. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but would you like to share those?
I mostly agree with Jordan, but like I said, I totally defer to LTS or build or release on this issue. I think Ben's right. It's not going to make it's really this is more about appearances than anything else, because someone running an EOL operating system is unlikely to install a just released version of Node, and if they do, they're unlikely to be surprised that it doesn't completely work on their operating system.
Yeah,
Well,
quick
it's-
question.
Go ahead.
Has it ever been our responsibility to make sure new versions get upstream to like Debian or whatever?
Quite the opposite, really. I mean, we don't have the best of release schedule with Debian. I mean, with the way that LTS or just like apt repositories work, they're stuck on fairly old versions, and they're not like constantly updating those through the life cycle of the release itself. That's something I personally wanted to see improve. Trevor, firsthand over at NodeSource, you all are maintaining that is it PPT? I forget the name of it particularly, but like the apt repositories for Node are being maintained by you all specifically because of that.
Okay.
I think Rod can build on that a bit more.
Yeah. The Linux. We don't call them PPAs anymore because that only applies really to the Ubuntu ecosystem. But the app repositories we're maintaining apply to most things that run apt. The other point I want to make to add to this is we actually have increased difficulty over time, even getting the required platforms to test and build on. So as they drop support, they're going to be drop support by our infrastructure providers as well. So when at the moment we're running CentOS 5 to do builds for the LTS versions, but you can't. I'm pretty sure you can't create a new CentOS 5 like droplet or instance on these providers we're using now. So if we were to, for some reason, lose the current instances we've got, we're going to have trouble getting them again. So it just becomes very difficult to even get the base operating systems for us to test on. So tying ourselves too strictly to these things can create problems.
Right. So I guess it's at this point, it's how strong do we want to be? Like, are we comfortable with that last statement that I, said that we just basically state we don't build or test against those end-of-life distributions and that we don't recommend them? Or do we want something stronger that actually says, they're unsupported, whatever unsupported means in air quotes, when they hit EOL?
I like the language that's there right now. I think that if we start using language such as unsupported, then we need to define what unsupported means, which becomes a new contract.
Right. It might force us to define what supported mean, which is, which we don't necessarily need to do, right?
Yeah, I actually, I was not aware that it was down to just a kernel level right now. And I think that is actually a really nice broad way of supporting things and gives us a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
So Rich, I know I'm keep talking about, you seem to be the one person kind of in the group right now who's leaning on the other side. You said you mostly agree with Jordan, but you didn't really express the exact things. So what are the exact things about dropping support during an LTS that you're uncomfortable with?
I guess someone I'm thinking about enterprise environment or whatever, or someone running an old operating system that but they chose that one because it if we go LTS and we support an operating system, and then halfway through the LTS life cycle or whatever, we drop that operating system, that just feels like we're kind of breaking a contract with the end user. And a lot of it, again, has to do with what we mean by supported, because, to me, and apparently to Jordan too, I think, supported just basically means, you'll try, and that's true with things that aren't EOL. Like there are operating system quirks that we can do nothing about that affect how Node operates, affect libuv or whatever. And saying something is unsupported feels, and again, based on Ben's comment, this is a lot about appearances and optics. Saying something is unsupported kind of feels like you probably understand where I'm going with this. I mean, I don't feel strongly enough to fight.
I'll add in the extra complication is that sometimes a platform may end of life generally, but you can actually pay and get extended support. So even though we're unsupported, that doesn't necessarily mean a company is.
But if a company is paying for extended support of that operating system, they could theoretically also pay for extended support of Node on that operating system. It's not our job necessarily as volunteers to manage that. I do think, like Rich, one point that I'm getting from what you're saying that I think may be important to stress is that maybe it's less about quote unquote support and more about what infrastructure we have in our CI. Because realistically, what we're really talking about and what we really care about is not having to maintain end of life OSs in our CI.
Yeah.
Seems very reasonable from both a security standpoint and a sustainability standpoint. And so we're not ever saying, hey, if you have a patch for this system, we won't land it. We're just saying, hey, we're only going to test against operating systems that are not at end of life. And I don't think that's unreasonable.
I don't think so either. I think the important thing is to be absolutely clear about what we mean, and maybe that's the problem with support is that it means different things to different people. But yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, like we're doing the user a favor if we tell them that once your operating system is EOL, we're not testing on it anymore, and and bug fixes as always are best effort, and et cetera, and strong.
Yeah.
We're doing them a favor if we strongly recommend that they move off of that operating system, obviously.
One of the complications with that is that we may then have to define what systems we do test on, because we don't list that anywhere explicitly in the Node.js repo or on building or supported platforms or anything. That we don't test on Arch Linux. We don't test on a bunch of other. We don't test on RHEL. We test on CentOS, assuming that it'll be the same. So if we get into that area of having to say, we don't test on your distribution once it becomes unsupported, then is that suggesting we do test on it while it's supported? No, we don't.
Well, we don't list any. I don't know. We don't list any in particular, so it may not make it clear, but it should at least be a hint that says we don't. If you're on EOL ones, you're at more risk. Like you're definitely not being tested on.
Just one more thing. No, sorry, I've lost it. I think other people were trying to talk.
Let's go to Josh if he has anything to say, and then to Anna.
Yeah, I just was going to say that at Microsoft, at least, I think support is a little more than best effort. Like best effort is a different category. Support kind of means we're going to fix the problem for you somehow or other. And best effort means, if we can't fix it, we can't. We'll do our best.
But what is so is support in that? I understand exactly where you're coming from, but then maybe how do you apply support in open source and that it's a volunteer effort? So
exactly, I was thinking the same thing. Everything.
There's no nobody is actually signed up and getting paid to do something. So how do you translate to we're going to fix it for you versus the maybe it's just the wrong word to use. I don't know.
Well, but we don't want to say, I think it's good that we're using the word support because that is important to enterprises. And if we start saying it's best effort and it's volunteer, then that might, turn people off too. So it's a tricky question.
Anna, did you have something to say?
Well, yeah, just asking for clarification. Like, for example, with the Node 8 release, we were talking about moving. I think we did move from CentOS 5 to CentOS 6. Like, we're not talking about doing that during an LTS line, right?
No.
Because that would break people, right?
So we wouldn't move from one to the other, but I think the perfect example that was mentioned before was Ubuntu 12 versus Ubuntu 14, where Ubuntu 12 goes end of life during the life cycle of LTS, that we would no longer be testing in CI for the extra time of that LTS, the version of Ubuntu that had been supported. I think one point I just want to put out there and I'll hand it back to you is maybe the way in which we can talk about OS or Linux flavor support can be specifically by the flavor. So we could say we support Ubuntu, but not be specific about the version. Was kind of a thought there. It looks like Rich has his hand up.
I want to propose that we kick this back to GitHub, that we sort of once we have minutes, copy paste the contents into the GitHub issue so that people know what we talked about and thought about if they didn't listen to this meeting. and that we check back in a week. And if there's no decision in a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, but about a week, I would guess, then we just, we make a decision on what the wording should be.
Yeah, I think there seems to be some consensus on the last wording. So if you don't like that, go back to GitHub and make some suggestions.
Yeah,
So just quickly, go for it.
Okay, I'll go for it. I just remember what I was going to say. We may actually be talking ourselves around in circles here and not really in practice. We support libc versions and compiler versions. That's really what we support. When it comes to things not working on different Linux distributions, because I think we're mainly talking about Linux distributions here, I can't actually think of any good examples of things that have failed on a Linux distribution, but not on another one with an equivalent or a roughly equivalent libc or compiler, except in the case of some configuration is different and our tests won't execute, but not actually Node itself failing. So in practice, as long as we're supporting the libc version and the compiler version and some of the rough things about that environment, it should actually just work. So I'm not sure. I'm not saying that we won't run into problems, but we may never even run into a problem here as long as we're supporting that rough environment.
So one PathMax on BSD was one that kind of caught us by surprise with the real path implementation for just one example, but that wasn't between versions of the same OS. So just one instance of the OS caught that. But just the one thing I wanted to quickly say before we move forward, and I think this is the crux of the issue, does anyone strongly object to us dropping end-of-life operating systems from our CI? I think that is the crux of what we're talking about here. And if anyone strongly objects, I would like to hear it. And then aside from that, we can talk about the other stuff.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure, you completely got what I was going for with my previous question, because if we know that we're in a situation where building a newer OS instead actually gives binaries that wouldn't work on the previous version that we were testing before, if we know that that's going to happen, are we still going to drop the older system in CI?
Rod, how are we building the tarballs for Linux tarballs? Because as far as I know, it's just one system building all the Linux tarballs, right?
No, we now have two, and that's so to Anna's point, we're still running CentOS 5 even though it's out of support, and we're going to try and we're going to have to try and continue running it for the lifetime of Node 4 and 6 because we're building those binaries on that particular set. So the goal is to always build it in the same environment. So it's got the same libc, same compiler for the lifetime of that LTS. But there's now a thing in Jenkins that when we're building that, if we're building Node 8 or newer, it builds on CentOS 6. For that reason, that CentOS 5 is out of support and will drop soon. And Node 6 will go, and then we'll be free of CentOS 5 completely. But we're also still testing on CentOS 5. We haven't dropped them, and there's no discussion of dropping testing on that.
I just to add is but if there was an alternative that had the same kernel level that was supported, we could consider switching to that, right?
Theoretically, but in reality,
yeah, I know in reality. So, but it's really back to it's the kernel levels we don't look to change for the life of a release.
Hey, I'm just curious, how do other projects and how does Chrome say, all right, well, we're upgrading, and at this point, we're no longer going to support, this operating system, or since they don't have an LTS, some other project that does have an LTS, how do they handle it? If anybody has an example.
Chrome is at most 12 weeks old, so we never run into that problem.
Okay.
I mean, commercially, we end up supporting things and we don't drop platform support for the life of whatever our support statement is. I know that's different than open source projects, but
okay, so you support the actual platform, not the kernel, like we've been doing.
yeah, we would typically list like, okay, it's Red Hat 7.1 or something like that.
Okay.
So I guess the question here that we can maybe look at, like, is there a way that we could look at having supported builds of kernels and libcs and kind of try to align that with the LTS before things go LTS? Like maybe we're stuck with 4 and 6 because of the current contract, but is this something that we can like explicitly plan out for Node 8 before it goes LTS so that we like know that we're going to be supported the entire time and not maintaining out-of-date infra?
Didn't we do exactly that for when 6 went LTS? I think I remember something about moving the CI systems to something that we knew we could support for a longer time.
But we have CentOS 5, so we're like in the problem where like some things end of life that we're going to have to support for like 2 years.
Yeah, I don't think we did that for Linux. I know for 8, we chose some for AIX, based on the lifetime. We updated the minimums.
I think, hey folks, I think that we should, when we do a LTS release, we should say, look, Ubuntu 12 is going out of support at this point, and we will provide you binaries till that point. As usual, so those type of things are planned. So if somebody is planning to release a C to upgrade a Node version in a live system using old Linux distribution, typically there is somebody making those decisions. So I think the only point is not making those decisions in an expected way, like telling as possible whenever we know. So when we do an LTS release that some of the operating system support are phasing out. So and keep supporting them until they are still supported by their vendor.
Okay, I'm going to repeat my proposal to see if we have some agreement to it at this point, which is let's put this back into the GitHub issue and let's take a look at it next week. Hopefully it resolves itself. Does that work for everybody or not so much?
That sounds good to me. I'd like, if we can, to add Node.js build and Node.js LTS in there for this to be discussed in their working group meetings so that they can provide, releases LTS, yeah. So I just think those working groups should have a conversation, put the results of those conversations in the.
I suspect they were, but anyway, probably worthwhile again. But I'm +1 on Rich's suggestion. Let's move it back to GitHub and continue the discussion there.
Okay, so hopefully, it'll resolve itself, but we'll leave it labeled CTC agenda so we check back on it next week, and if it's been spinning its wheels for a week, we'll make a move. But otherwise, we'll let the working groups and the people invested in the issue sort this out. It certainly looks like it's close and moving forward. It looks like Michael already mentioned those groups, so hooray!
I just threw that in right this second.
You are efficient. Okay. All right. Before we go to public Q&A and meeting announcements and stuff, I would like to propose that we vote on the current CTC nominees. They are Matteo, and I hope I say your last name well. Matteo? It's Matteo, and it's Shoei, and I'm sure I'm saying both of their names wrong, and I apologize. So can I get a second on that?
I second that.
Awesome. So let's have a vote, unless anybody objects to a vote. Okay, let's start with Matteo since he's here. Any commentary before we? I don't. We're usually pretty succinct about these things, but any comments, please?
I believe in the past, usually I mean, I'm not sure if this has any relevance now, but in the past, usually we did the voting separately from them being there. I don't remember what the reasons for that are, so I don't know if it really matters.
Yeah, I'm 100% positive I was at the meeting where I was voted on, so possible the prices have changed. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, I was just going to say we also have allowed GitHub voting as well. So
yeah,
maybe if we don't get quorum here, then just pass the votes off to GitHub.
All right. So Josh, are you getting all these votes, or do you need help corralling them?
I wasn't corralling them. Just if we have a majority.
They're in the comments, and the people are putting them in the chat, which I think is the best.
Is there anyone that's -1? Maybe that would be easier, or is that not? That's not.
No, that's cool. Actually, let's go that. Let's do that next. Or anybody who is either abstaining or objecting. Great. So it's unanimous of the attendees. Next, let's do Shoei. So we already have a bunch of +1s in there for both and for Shoei. So are there any abstentions or objections? Okay, Nikita, are you talking about the nomination issue, or are you talking about the previous issue we were talking about?
I'm talking about the nomination.
As we have 15 CTC members on this call and no objections and no abstains, it would appear to me that this passes with a majority in both cases.
Seems unanimous. I want to get that issue for Nikita before we, and then I'll do the usual congratulations and stuff. Or maybe Rod can do it. He's really good at it.
Stick some video on and do a dance for you all, like a celebratory dance.
I'd like to see that, Rod.
I'm in my pajamas at the moment, so maybe not.
Even better.
Okay, it looks like there they are in the sideboard. Okay, great. Well, let's see here. Okay, super duper. All right. Congratulations, Matteo, and Shoei, if you end up listening to this recording, congratulations, and sorry about your name, because I'm terrible. I'm a horrible person. But yeah, thanks for all the contributions of the year. Welcome, and we have a bunch of things that I'll shoot you an email or someone else will about. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So yay! All right. Anybody else want to do a better job of welcoming them than I just did?
Yay! Congratulations, both of you. Well, thank you for your service, both of you, and we look forward to your excellent contributions.
Thank you, folks. Also thanks from Johi that's not here. So.
All right, cool. All right, so I think we are now at the part of the meeting where we list off upcoming meetings, and we mentioned that we're about to take Q&A from anyone. So if you're on the YouTube stream or if you're in the IRC channel, now's a good time to post your questions for the CTC. In the meantime, there is the Node.js Foundation calendar, which is at nodejs.org/calendar. This meeting, the CTC meeting next week, will be at 11 o'clock UTC, but on June 14th, and that'll be 4 a.m. if you're on the west coast of the United States, 7 a.m. if you're on the east coast of the United States, and much more agreeable times if you're in Europe and probably in Asia and Australia as well. And with that, do we have any questions, Jeremiah or Rod or whoever is watching for these things?
We do have a question from William Hernandez. What do you guys think about Adonis.js?
I don't. Never heard of it.
I just looked it up. It looks like a new MVC framework. If anyone has any experience with that, let us know. Otherwise, I'm not sure this is the best place to ask for that, but thanks for your question anyway, William. And there's nothing else that I see on YouTube other than that.
Okay. And I'm not seeing anything in IRC. Not even any emojis. Okay. Well, with that, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for attending, everybody. And until next week, thanks so much. Thanks. I like saying thanks. Thanks.
Bye.
Later.
Bye.